Hello again, my name is Greg. I'm an instruction designer and teacher and amateur board game designer, and in this YouTube channel I'm sharing my attempts to design a Christian tabletop role-playing game, because that's just what the general public is crying out for. So this video is going to be about success and failure and what that means in the game, how to determine that. So normally when people are doing a skill check in a TTRPG, the easiest way of doing it is with a pass-fail mechanic. Either you succeed or you don't, and that's it. Either you hit someone with a weapon or you don't, either you climb the wall or you can't, and so on. So this becomes more difficult if you're rolling for something like getting information from someone or interrogating someone or something like that. If you fail, you get 0 information, but if you succeed, even by 1 point, then do you get everything? There's also the possibility of degrees of success or even degrees of failure. How badly do you fail? Does your character learn anything or grow as a result of the experience? Or do you only get experience when you win? So presumably you probably do learn something from failure as the player, but is there a way of incorporating that into the mechanics of the system? So in contrast to that, to the pass-fail, there are systems like Powered by the Apocalypse or various systems like that, which has a graded system of results, where in Powered by the Apocalypse you roll 2 6-sided dice and add modifiers, and depending on how high you roll, that will determine how well you do. So on a total of 6 or less, it's a failure, on 7 to 9 it's a partial success, and on 10 or higher it's a full success. So you can have results with either bad, good, or excellent consequences, which then help drive the narrative. This seems to be the way that things are kind of going in this hobby. A lot of the games that are being designed at the moment are being designed with a range of consequences that allow the narrative to kind of be richer and more interesting in terms of the results that you can get. An obvious one, similar to, I think, was developed from Apocalypse World, was Blaze in the Dark. Uses the same general categories of failure and 2 types of success, but this uses a dice pool system, with the highest number rolled determining which result you get. But even similar things are being incorporated in games like Draw Steel, which has 3 different types of results, which are called tiers, when rolling a 2d10 system, and Daggerheart, which has 4 different outcomes, which again are dependent on rolling 2d10s, one of which is hope and one is fear, and the 4 results would be failure with hope, failure with fear, and then success with hope and success with fear. So each dice result giving a different consequence in the narrative. Now this does present an issue for the game master or the person who's sort of mediating the game to come up with some kind of appropriate consequence on the spot, depending on the result of the roll. So that's what I want to do here, just to make it harder. So what I'm thinking of is to have a number of different results that are possible, so namely 4 of them. Fail, sort of conditional success, a normal success, and then a profound success. So these would follow some of the conventions of narrative and improvisation. So on fail, you don't get what you want, and you have bad consequences. So in improvisation terms, this would be sort of no and something or something else. Somewhat good or conditional success, so you get what you need, if only just, but you also have to deal with negative or bad consequences, so kind of yes but. This happens in the Bible all the time. A lot of people are doing good things, but it ends up having negative consequences as a result, often people wanting to stone them or certain things happen. The next one is an ordinary, just a normal success. You get what you want with no bad consequences. So just sort of a normal yes, you succeed. And then an amazingly good result or a profound success. You get everything you want and more with good consequences or results. So kind of yes and something else. So essentially this would be similar to the previous system, Powered by Apocalypse, whereby the higher you roll, the better the result. So it's quite intuitive that you need to roll over a certain target to achieve a good result, like a normal, or you need to achieve over a certain target to get a better success. So the issue I'm facing is, how do you determine what the targets are for each area? So normally for a game of pass or fail, a GM might set their own target number on the spot. for any particular skill check. They would judge how difficult something was to do at the time and give it a particular number. The more experience you have with this as a GM, then the easier it would be for you to do that. But if this game is meant for people who are new to the hobby, then they need a good guide to help them demonstrate when something is good or better or worse. So for example, if I put that into a line, it would be something like this. A higher dice roll, meaning a better result. So if I start with a general number line, so from 0 to 20, and divide it evenly, then I can adjust it as I go. It'll look basically like this. Then we can have the 4 different dice along the line. So you'd have 6-sided, 8-sided, 10-sided, and 12-sided. So what this means then is if I keep the failure target at 5 and under, then the D6 has an 83.5% chance of failure, or only a 1 in 6 chance of success. The average of a D6 roll is also 3.5, which is also a failure. So whichever attribute the player put their D6 against, either physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, then they would have to add at least a 2-point modifier to any of their talents in that attribute just to bring its average up to over 5. In other words, that attribute would be their least useful and probably therefore least used, kind of like a dump stat. Similarly, with an 8-sided dice or a D8, there's only a 41% chance of success with no modifiers, which is less than half. The average for a D8 is 4.5, which means a modifier of at least 1 to pull it up to 5.5. One of the things I think I need to change about this distribution of target numbers along this line is that the bad success is way too big. It means that people need to roll up to 10 just in order to get a normal success with no bad consequences on their roll, which is basically impossible with a D6 or an 8-sided dice without a ton of modifiers. So I think I need to bring the bad success back to at least an 8, so probably between 6 and 8. This means that for a D6 and D8, the player would need some decent modifiers to get to a normal success, but it is possible. So the D8 would need a 1-point modifier to bring its average up to 5.5, and the D6 would need a 2-point modifier to bring it up to the same place. So the drive in the game would be to constantly try to add points to your roll to increase your success. So one way of using the concept of failure to help people is to bring in the idea of experience. So if a player fails a roll, then they get a point of experience that they can then spend on a future roll, or they can save it up for later. So experience points can be added to the attribute rather than to the individual talents, but can be spent on any talent related to that attribute. So the idea is that anytime somebody fails, they get the experience point, they can add it to the attribute, and then spend it whenever they want. The thinking behind this is that I want to encourage players to be more active rather than passive, and to try things and try to roll rather than not. So that even if they don't succeed in the roll, they will still try in order to gain the experience. This means that it's possibly better to have a target number for success higher, since then it's more likely that even if players fail that, they can still gain experience to use later when they really need it, like during a conflict or something like that. So this is just a way of trying to mitigate bad dice rolls in the system. But I also think it's kind of thematic in that failure is not the end of the story, especially from a biblical perspective, but rather it's a way in which we grow and gain strength from it. So there is that. The other thing about a single dice system is that there is no probability curve. Every dice is just as likely to roll one number as much as any other, so it is going to be more swingy, and you are going to fail just as likely as you are to succeed. I think probably it depends on the players. If they like this kind of swinginess, it means there's no guarantees that you would succeed whenever you roll the dice. But adding more points to a roll and finding ways to bring the dice values up may be an interesting part of the game, especially for people who like a game to be more crunchy, and provides possibilities for them to sort of improve and find ways around the system. At least that's the theory. Now, there is an alternative to this, which I've also been thinking a lot about lately, which is to totally get away from the D20 dice altogether and turn this into a dice pool system. The reason is because, firstly, it's easier to buy a whole packet of simple 6-sided dice than it is to buy the polyhedral ones, which makes it easier and more accessible for people who aren't familiar with this hobby to get the equipment for it. Secondly, if you roll a heap of dice and just do something like count the number of sixes or the number of successes, then that is faster and easier than doing a bunch of maths, which you would have to do here. And thirdly, rolling a big handful of dice is just fun, which I think is more appealing, especially like for kids and trying to get people into the game. So if I did change this to a dice pool system, which I'm still thinking about it, it would mean that the numbers in the attributes would change to be the number of dice that the players would roll for that attribute. So something like 1 to 4, possibly, from the weakest attribute being 1 dice to the strongest attribute being 4 dice. The numbers then for the talents would be how many additional dice you would also roll when rolling for that talent. So when rolling for education, for instance, you would roll 7 dice. If I went with successful rolls, then being the number of sixes or whatever the number of successes is, which is kind of the easiest way of calculating it, then the target numbers would also change. There'd be something like 0 for failure, maybe 1 to 2 for a conditional success, 3 to 4 for a normal success, and 5 and over for a profound success. So even if the player failed and didn't roll any sixes or didn't roll any successes, they would still get an experience point the same way as the previous system, and that point would allow them to spend it to add an extra dice for a future roll in that attribute. So, again, trying to mitigate the dice pools. So one of the cool things also about dice pools is you can also add combinations. Like if you roll doubles or 3 of a kind, you get a certain advantage. Or if you get ones, then something bad happens, or things like that. You can use the dice to add to the narrative even further. Now, having said all that, even with experience points and aspects like that, people are still just going to want to succeed in their rolls, so the main driver of success in the game is to get their total result as high as possible. So the core loop would be trying to add more modifiers to a roll, either additional points or additional dice, in order to help push it up the line in terms of success. Which means that what I need to do is to add more abilities to allow people to do that, which is exactly what the next video is. So next time, I'm going to talk about the different classes in the game, or what I'm calling motivations after the motivational gifts, but that's all I'm going to do for this video. I'll do that next time. If you are interested in what I'm doing here, please let me know, or if you think a D20 or a dice pool would be better in your opinion, or even if you don't like either of them, please let me know. Anyway, I'm going to end it here. Thank you again for watching. If you want to follow this journey, please feel free to subscribe or click on the bell icon. And thank you again for watching.